All right, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. We are starting our briefing on the Secure the Vote 2022 initiative that Reform California is supporting, along with a number of other good government groups. We will be taking questions at the end of the prepared remarks, and we will also be entertaining questions over email if we don't get to everyone's questions. With that, let's go ahead and dive in and start up. The effort to secure the vote in California needs to be a multi-pronged effort. And we know that there are major problems with voting in California. And these are problems that are well documented, even though the liberal media refuses to acknowledge the problems. We know that California's voter rolls are filled with ineligible voters, people who have registered to vote years ago, but no longer reside at a residence, but they're still getting ballots. People who are dead, duplicate and triplicate registrations for the same person because of the state's woefully mismanaged motor voter program. And of course, people who frankly registered to vote, but do not meet the criteria. In many cases, they're not US citizens, or they may have a criminal record. The election integrity issues really stem from the fact that California politicians intentionally keep our voter rolls a complete mess. They want to be able to mail out as many ballots as possible, because then those ballots that are not secure, there's no chain of custody, can be harvested by their campaign operatives. And so the Democrats over the years have put in place a comprehensive system to weaken the integrity of our elections. And that has resulted in a loss of confidence and trust in the outcome of the elections. It used to be in California that your elections were determined by individuals. An individual would show up on election day and they would request a simple instrument called a ballot, just like a pen. All right. The pen is an instrument. The piece of paper, the ballot, is an instrument. But the person who made the decision to support a candidate or vote for or against a ballot measure was a person, an actual individual. And they actually had to show up at the polling station on election day. We have now divorced individuals from the process. Now, simply the instruments, the paper ballots, are the mechanism by which outcomes of elections are determined. That does not mean that an individual actually cast that vote. The individual may not even be aware that their vote was cast on their behalf. That is the problem that has been created by all mail-in ballot elections. The Democrats say that they want to make voting easier. Well, voting has been quite easy. There's never been a problem with voting in an easy way in California. But what they've done in the name of accessibility and ease of voting is they've created an environment where there's no chain of custody on ballots, and therefore it's no longer individuals that vote. The ballots are being voted by someone. Some cases, and frankly, in the vast majority of cases, it's a legitimate vote. But the concern is that in too many cases, that the vote is not being cast by an individual with a legitimate right to vote in that election. And that's what we have to be addressing. So the first thing that we believe we need to do is we need to pass a law in the state of California to require voter ID, government issued identification, in order to cast a ballot. Many states across the country have this approach. The Supreme Court has upheld voter ID requirements across the country. There is no evidence, and the courts have ruled this, no evidence to suggest that requiring voter ID somehow is racist or suppresses the vote. That's just a bald-faced lie perpetrated by the media and by Democrats who oppose the notion of having voter identification for voting. We filed a ballot measure in the fall for voter ID in the state of California, but we received back from the Attorney General a biased title and summary, as well as a threat by the Attorney General and the Legislative Analyst Office that they would challenge legally our ballot measure. So we are redrafting and tightening it up and looking forward to qualifying this for the 2024 election. So, but that is going to be the most important thing, the most effective remedy to election integrity problems in California is the voter ID ballot measure. Second, we are routinely supporting, along with a coalition of groups, the auditing and reviewing of county voter rolls to make sure that the individuals registered on those voter rolls are legitimate and eligible voters. The state of California Secretary of State has prohibited election offices from maintaining accurate voting rolls. They've told voting offices that they're not allowed to remove people when very commonsensically the evidence exists to suggest that the individuals are not eligible. In the state of California, the state's crazy motor voter system allows for people just simply to pinky swear that they are eligible to vote. People who receive public welfare are given voter registration cards and they're told fill all of the paperwork out. Illegal immigrants are getting public welfare. And when they're being given a packet of information and being told by an agent of the government to fill all the information out, our concern is that they certainly do that. Because we don't vet and verify the eligibility status of people registering for voting to vote in California, and because we don't update our voter rolls when people move, we know that a substantial percentage of individuals are registered to vote in California who are no longer eligible. And that creates a big concern for voter fraud when you mail those people ballots. Voter verification and ballot harvesting is important. Obviously, we don't like ballot harvesting. We believe that people should be a blood relative or have power of attorney to return the ballot. However, it is the law. And so we have to do our job in doing ballot harvesting legally in the state to compete. And we also have to encourage voters who cast ballots to vote early and to track their vote. And then finally, monitoring the process. We believe that individuals should be involved in the election offices in each of the counties, watching what's going on so that they can verify whether laws are being broken and whether things are being done in a way that would challenge the outcome of an election. We need people in those offices so they can document this issue and report it to watchdogs like our third-party organizations. So those are the four prongs of our election integrity efforts, our secure the vote efforts. And let me tell you a little bit about how that will be accomplished in this election. First, and I know that some of the other individuals out there may have an issue with this, but I can just say they're wrong. We believe that in order to ensure election integrity and to get as many people through the process as possible and make sure that their vote is counted properly, we believe in the safe way to vote. And we're going to be promoting this safe way to vote statewide, and we encourage you to as well. SAFE stands for Send, Audit, Fix, Examine. Send. You need to vote, and you need to tell your friends to vote by mail on day one of this election. Do not wait till election day. Do not listen to some of the other people out there who say, don't vote by mail. I don't know what their agenda is, but they're wrong. And they're having a very negative effect on conservative candidates throughout the state of California. And frankly, I think that either they're wrong because of ignorance or they're wrong because they have an agenda, financial or otherwise, to mislead people. No, we want to educate all voters to vote by mail on day one. Here's why. You vote by mail on day one, you now have 29 days to verify that your vote was received and counted. If you wait till election day and vote the way that these wingnut advocates are saying to vote, you will likely put yourself in a situation where your vote won't count. Because if you go into an election office and say, I'm ripping up my absentee ballot, I destroyed it, I want a new ballot, you're actually not given a real ballot. You're given a provisional ballot. And the provisional ballot is counted at the very end of the process, which means if they throw your ballot out because your signature doesn't match, or for whatever reason they determine that they don't want to count your vote, it's probably too late to fix it. So we want all of our voters to vote on day one, and we want them to vote by mail. And do not listen to anyone else who's going to try to deceive you or to trick you or to confuse you or to delay you. Vote on day one by mail, so that now you have the full 29 days to fix any problems before the election. Here's the other reason why I want you to vote on day one. By all of our center-right voters voting on day one, you are removing yourself from a campaign's target list. And so therefore, they don't have to spend as much money sending you mailers, sending you texts, sending you phone calls, having volunteers knock on your door. Do you realize by telling our voters to wait to the very end, you're costing our campaigns probably 2 to 3 times the cost of an election? And we already know that the conservative and center-right candidates do not have the financial resources that the left has. They have unlimited money. They have the liberal media on their side. They've got the big PACs. They've got the dark money groups, and they've got those government unions. They do not lack money. The center-right candidates are the ones that have to scrimp. And so we need to get every one of our center-right voters to take that burden off of those candidates, take those burdens off of the party. By returning your ballot on day one, you take your name off the list and you save all of our good candidates all that money. So send in your ballot day one of the election and mail it. Now, audit. The reason why we want you to send it in on day one is because then we want you to start tracking your ballot on day 5, 6, 7. And you go online to where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov, and you can check that website every day until your vote is counted and verified. If there's a problem, then you're able to fix. So if there's a problem where it says we received your ballot, but we're rejecting it, well, then that gives you 15 days before the election, 20 days, 10 days, whatever it is, to march into a polling center and say, hey, I want another ballot. I want to fix this. I don't know why you guys didn't count it. It needs to be counted. Also, if they say they didn't receive your ballot by day 15 of the election, walk in and demand a second ballot. You get a right to 2 ballots in California. If you're dead, you get 3 ballots. But under the rules of the Democrats, if you want a second ballot, you get something called a provisional ballot. Now, they're only supposed to count 1, but everyone is entitled to request a second provisional ballot if for whatever reason they're not confident that their vote was counted by the election office. The provisional ballots are counted after all the mail-in ballots are processed. So your vote will not be counted twice, but you will now have the ability to vote a second time to make sure that they have at least 1 ballot from you that they will count. That's where the fix comes in. Please do not wait till the election day, because we don't want you creating a line on the election day that will discourage some of our lower propensity voters. Those of you who say, I'm walking to my polling station on election day, darn it, I'm going to walk in and I want my sticker. What you're doing is you're creating a long line for low propensity voters, and those people are not as committed as you are. But also the problem becomes your polling station no longer exists. The Democrats are eliminating polling stations, and they're going to something called polling centers. And the polling centers are going to be open multiple days and multiple weeks out of the election, in advance of the election. And so you can still get that wonderful little sticker if you would like, but you have to go in earlier. So that's what fix is. And then finally, examine. I'm encouraging our volunteers to not only volunteer for a candidate or a cause that they're supporting, but why not go and poll watch? Or if you need money, why not take a job with your county registrar of voters? There are paid positions, seasonal positions, part-time positions that are available. And I sure as heck would love to have you get that paid position more than some wingnut from the left wing who's with Acorn or one of these other left-wing groups. Sadly, conservative volunteers, center-right volunteers, have not been aware that these jobs are available. And that's why the left wing has filled most of these positions. I believe that we need balance in these election offices, and having your eyes and ears in that office can be critical because it could make you a whistleblower at some point if something bad happens. Also, we are asking unpaid volunteers to also monitor the processing and counting of ballots. This is very important because some of the groups out there are saying, we're going to poll watch on election day. No, that's not helpful. In the last election, 93% of ballots were returned by mail. Only 7% of ballots were cast at the polling stations on election day. So in other words, you didn't monitor 93% of the election. We need our monitors to be at the election office of each county on day one of the election. That means coming up May 10th and 11th. And in the month of October, the general election, October 10th and 11th. And that's what examine means. Next slide. Our strategies for our campaign at Reform California, and we urge the Republican Party to do this. We urge candidates to do this. Our strategies need to incorporate election integrity at every step. So in this campaign, our 4 strategies are to drive the narrative. We will be focusing on cost of living, taxes, crime. Right there, it says sales and mileage tax for our San Diego candidates. We're going to be focusing on that, but statewide, taxes, cost of living, crime, the voice of parents and schools. These are issues that drive our voters to participate in the process, and that's why we need to drive the narrative. Second, we need to rebuild our volunteer base and our canvas programs, our college canvassers. We call them regional political directors, RPDs. We need to harvest ballots and get out the vote. That's why we're using the Secure the Vote 2022 campaign to educate and get our voters to turn in their ballot on day one. And then we're going to canvass neighborhoods and drag the lower propensity voters out. We do not want to waste our time with you. Okay, you are perfect voters. We love you. We know that if there was a hailstorm, you would still show up to vote. So why are you forcing campaigns to waste their time on you and all that money? Get your vote in on day one, please, and help out the team. And then, of course, we're encouraging our candidates to work together, because if they turn out one vote by working together, it benefits the entire team. Next slide. Obviously, we will be doing a lot of issue advocacy around the issues that we believe will motivate our voters. Next slide. We are using every opportunity to recruit volunteers and college students. We are getting a lot of volunteers through the parents' coalitions that we are forming in school districts. We've seen people who've never been involved in politics before get involved this year, and that's really exciting. But when we recruit candidates, we ask them to coordinate their volunteers with the overall effort and share volunteers across campaigns. We're going to be hosting ballot harvesting events, and we've got an emerging leaders program going with high schools and colleges to get conservative and center-right students working together. Next slide. Harvesting ballots. In the Republican Party, we believe that we need to educate voters about 15 days out of the election that their ballot is missing if they haven't returned their ballot. Again, please do not force us to send this letter to your home, because it costs us about $1 per mailer. That's $1 less that we have to go chase another voter. And so we are going to do personalized handwritten letters to voters to encourage them to return their ballot, particularly if they've not gotten their ballots in during the first 2 weeks. Your ballot is missing is going to be a very jarring title to see on that letter on the right-hand side there. We used this approach very effectively in the special election in La Mesa and won a Democrat seat as a result, boosting Republican turnout, by the way, by 18%. Next slide. The ballot harvesting also includes barbecue, beer, and ballot invitations. These will be mailers, slate mailers, where we encourage people to check out not only an event in their area, but also the voter guide that will have all of our candidates listed on the online voter guide. But we are promoting candidates through paid mailers as well. If you notice on the bottom right over there, election integrity, the safe way to vote. So what we just talked about on safe voting will also be going out to all voters that we communicate with. And on the left side of that right-hand side flyer, if you notice, we're trying to activate volunteers and supporters. Next slide. We are going to be targeting our deployment of volunteers in waves using either Campaign Sidekick, which is the cell phone online app, or i360. Wherever you are, you'll be using one or the other of those apps, Campaign Sidekick or i360. We need to encourage all of our volunteers to learn how to use the app. I know that a lot of people don't like using apps, but frankly, if we don't use the app, we're not going to be coordinated or organized. We cannot be using pen and paper clipboards anymore. We've got to get people using these apps to make it easy for them. So the first 2 weeks, we're asking you to go door to door with the voter guide so that our candidates, so that our target voters know who the endorsed candidates are, who the center-right candidates are. During weeks 3 and 4, we then go after the voters who did not vote in the first week of the election. And we have something called drive and drag. We pair up volunteers to drive to lower propensity voter homes to specifically knock on their doors. Now, by doing this, we're trying to target our limited volunteer resources, our limited financial resources on turning out the voters that ordinarily would not show up. So we're going to skip a lot of homes in the weeks 3 and 4, because if we knock on the door of a family that always returns their ballot in every election, it's pretty much a waste. We're going to be going after voters who only return their ballot maybe once every 4 years, or who may be new voters who may not have voted before, and we're going to try to encourage them to vote for the first time. That's why they're driving the car and only hitting one every 5, 6, 7, or 8 houses. That's why we pair up the volunteers, drive and drag. Next slide. And of course, we are doing a targeted approach. That's Orange County. Reason why I'm showing Orange County there is that we have so many target seats in Orange County, in Central Valley, in San Diego, in Inland Empire. But Orange County is one of our battlegrounds. And we're going to be encouraging our candidates in each of these areas to work together on their get out the vote operation. Again, turning out one voter for a congressional candidate should benefit the state assembly, state senate, city council candidates as well. Next slide. And by the way, this is how the Democrats do it. We've also been doing the auditing of voter rolls. The Transparency Foundation is a 501c3. They've been doing the research. They do not take official positions on ballot measures or candidates. They don't get involved in express advocacy in campaigns. But their audit of the voter rolls shows that the risk of voter fraud is pretty high in California. The initial audit was 7.1% of voters. And based on that, they have identified 83,725 high-risk ballots from just the 7.1% sample. These are voters who received a ballot in the 2021 recall who did not vote since 2016. And their legal address status, therefore, is in question. You know what that translates to? Over 1 million ballots were sent out during the recall to individuals who no longer lived at the home. We found 910 confirmed erroneous ballots. These are people who received a ballot in the recall, even though they had moved from their residence. Statewide possible count, 12,816 confirmed erroneous ballots. 17,715 questionable ballots, or questionable votes. These are voters who cast a ballot in the recall, but did not vote in any election since March 1st of 2016. Now, you cannot convince me that you wanted to vote for Gavin Newsom or against, but you did not bother to vote against Donald Trump or for Donald Trump. You will not convince me that that sort of voter exists in our state. So just based on the 7.1% of voters that we audited through the Transparency Foundation, that the Transparency Foundation audited, there are 17,715 highly questionable ballots that were returned in this election. When you expand that sample from 7.1% out, you notice what we're looking at. You're looking at maybe 250,000 fraudulent votes, highly susceptible to fraud. These votes need to be examined, and we need to find the actual individuals and ask them, did you actually vote in the recall? Yes or no? Because if they say no, you have the proof that you need, that the Democrats are running an operation statewide to harvest votes of people who are not actually consenting to the ballot being returned. Next slide. We are going to be refiling this ballot measure in time for the 2024 election. We did not believe that we had the time or the financial bandwidth to file again based upon the legal threat from the Attorney General. Next slide. All right, so let me switch over to the Transparency Foundation slides. They have put this together. They are conducting a training on May 2nd for their volunteers. They've gotten thousands of volunteers statewide to sign up to do poll watching assignments in their area statewide. And so let me just walk you through what they are recommending. So let's let you know the 501c3 status of the Transparency Foundation means that they do not take partisan or campaign positions. They will not endorse candidates. They will not endorse ballot measures. However, they are interested in improving trust and confidence in our elections. They want trust in the outcome of elections. And so therefore they are working on a Secure the Vote initiative to educate voters on how to vote securely, as well as to police the process and be a watchdog of the process and alert policymakers to any weaknesses or non-compliant activities. Next slide. They developed the safe voting method, which we talked about. Again, send in your ballot on day one. Next slide. That way you can track it. Next slide. Next slide. Audit online, fix anything that might happen, and then of course examine, participate in the process. Now under the examine side, they are promoting volunteer recruitment and training and then deployment around the state. They're also they're going to be promoting these paid jobs as well. They're going to try to help out the registrar of voter, help out to make sure that as many broad-based political views are seen inside the process. One way that they're going to be doing this is that they are assigning shifts starting on the 30th day out of an election, because that's when ballots actually start coming back to the registrar of voters. In fact, we do know there are people who actually show up on that day, the first day that it's eligible to cast a vote. On day one, 30 days out, they're already showing up and using the voting centers. So we want to make sure that we have shifts of volunteers and paid workers working each day leading up to the election itself. So that's 30 days out of the election that they have to be ready to volunteer. Next slide. We already talked about the paid jobs. Go ahead, next slide. Every registrar of voters office has a link to the paid jobs. So here's what we're asking the volunteers to do as election monitors. First, they should sign up so that we don't send more monitors during a shift than we need. We don't need a bunch of people standing around on one shift. We need enough people to cover all the shifts so that we have eyes and ears in the process. Because when we don't have volunteers monitoring, who knows what happens during those times. So we need to make sure we cover each shift. We're asking volunteers to sign up at electionintegrityca.com, electionintegrityca.com. Once they are there, we are asking them to look at signatures and addresses to make sure that they are correctly matched when the ballots are brought in. When a ballot is mailed in, the process is that each individual ballot is scrutinized to ensure that the signature is made on the outside of the ballot, and that they are supposed to check the signature to ensure that it resembles the signature on file. Now, the signature on file, if it does not match the signature on the outside of the envelope, it can be challenged by an election monitor. In the case where it is challenged, a supervisor then has to come over and they have to initiate a process to examine it. And I believe three individuals have to sign off that the signature is either correct or incorrect. So the first thing is signature verification. Second, if a ballot is scanned and it does not get read by the machine, then it gets set aside and a process is initiated called perfecting the ballot. That's where an election worker will examine the ballot and then transpose the votes. This is usually done properly, but we are worried that maybe it's not done properly. And so our volunteers need to watch the transposition of votes to ensure that no votes are counted for a race if it's not legitimate that the voter intended to vote. The law requires that the individual fill in the bubble. If they put an X, that is not to be counted. The law is clear. It has to be filled in. And so sometimes the reason why the machine doesn't read it is that maybe they used a pencil to fill it in, or a different color ink. But it's important to make sure that votes are not transposed in a manner that does not fit the voter intent. Again, if there's a problem, you raise the issue at that point and you have a supervisor come over to make a decision and to explain the decision. Now, if you do not agree with the decision, you're not allowed to create a kerfuffle. You are allowed, however, to write down the name of the voter, the issue that you had, the name of the supervisor, the time and date, and then you can report that to our website, problemballots.com. All problems that volunteers observe, go to problemballots.com. If you suddenly see like a box of votes showing up and nobody validates the signatures, they just go ahead and feed them into the system, or ballots are showing up with no envelopes associated with them, document and then report it. Next slide. We will be giving every volunteer a simple cheat sheet for them to track their information. Next slide. What not to do. As I mentioned, do not interfere. Do not go to a voting booth that's occupied. Do not approach voters. Do not touch materials, especially machines. Do not talk about voters regarding their partisan choices. If you engage in conversation, it cannot be about voting for or against any office or measure on the ballot. Do not directly challenge a voter. You must present that only to the staff, and then they are to deal with the voter. Next slide. Don't wear any buttons or hats that could be misconstrued. Do not wear a uniform that would somehow signify that you're somehow with the government. Do not use cellular phones inside a polling place. I do believe, however, Jordan, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, I do believe they can use cell phones in the registrar of voters office, as long as they're not around a voting area, correct?
That is correct.
So you can take pictures of ballots as they're being processed. You just can't take pictures when someone's in a polling station voting. Do not ever touch an individual who's a polling worker. And of course, don't eat or drink. What we want to do is make sure that you're not somehow targeted for technical violations simply because they want to boot you out from doing your volunteer assignment. Now, there's actually some handbooks out there from some of the good county registrar of voters offices that give you information about what you can do. The Orange County Registrar of Voters Office has a nice handbook that you can review that we're sharing with our volunteers. Next slide. And of course, we will be staffing our help desk. People can email or call at any time with issues, and we will get back to them to answer their questions. Next slide. Okay, now with that, we're going to switch it over to the question and answer, and keep this safe voting method up there on the screen, and we will answer questions with that as our backdrop. If you want to ask a question, all you have to do is type it into the chat box. You also can click raise hand, and we can activate your microphone on the Zoom. So Jim says, are you tuned into Heritage Action Save Our Elections national call each Tuesday at Pacific noon? Yes, we have staff that are part of a number of groups that are doing election integrity to share information. Next, some are concerned that early voting allows the other side to know how much to cheat. No, that's not happening. I believe that the cheating is happening on the margins, but it's just enough to flip the target races. So for example, I don't believe that the Democrats are running a cheating operation in Maxine Waters' district because they know that she's going to get 80% of the vote. All right. I do believe that there are shenanigans going on in the target seats, and that's what worries me. And so I do believe it's on the margins. I don't believe that they're going to say, oh, we know exactly how many ballots we need to flip the election. But we do know that they're harvesting ballots inappropriately. So that's what we are doing, is making sure that we are verifying as much of the identity of these suspicious ballots that I referenced earlier to see if we can trigger a criminal investigation at some point during this year. Because we want to put the Democrats on notice that if you cheat, that this is not going to be accepted in this election, and that there are consequences. But no, I do not believe in, if you vote early, they'll know how many votes they need. If you're right about that, then they'll know how many votes they need on day 18 or 19 after the election is done, and they'll just show up with votes. Okay, so voting early doesn't prevent the issue that you're concerned about. Christopher says, can I drop it at a manned drop-off location? Yes, we actually encourage you to either use the Postal Service, or we prefer that you actually go to a manned polling center. And all these polling centers are now open 30 days out of the election at the registrar or voter's office, but in other areas throughout the county, 15 and 5 and 10 days out. So you can go to the website for your county and look up the open polling centers that are there. There's actually also metal drop boxes in many locations that you can use. But any of those opportunities you can afford yourself based on your comfort. Nancy says, I want to verify my vote was processed, but also confirmation of which candidate I voted for. I would love to see that too, but the concern has been that privacy issues might be compromised. So typically it's who you vote for is never tracked. And that's why that system's not in place. It would be nice to know that you could look up your actual ballot and track it back to who you voted for. But the concern would be that that might be hacked in, and that might discourage voting if people knew who you voted for. So that's been the debate about that issue, Nancy. Martin says, are you suggesting that by voting early, a person is taken off campaign solicitations, thus saving volunteer donations available for other needs? Absolutely, Martin. That's exactly what I'm saying. A good, well-run, efficient campaign takes your name off the list. So you'll receive less mail, less text messages, less phone calls, less knocks at the doors. Next question is, remember, if you want to hit raise hand, you can raise your hand and we can take questions over Zoom. Next question in the chat box: is the California Republican Party or any county central committees on board with your strategies? Yes, the San Diego Republican Party is, so is the Orange County Republican Party. We are in constant communication with the California Republican Party. We've sent the materials to Harmeet Dillon and Sean Steele, who are the National Republican Party representatives. And so all of them know what we are doing and how we're doing it. And we all share in the same strategies. Now, how we communicate that is not necessarily coordinated, but we are all on the same page. They may not have as many resources as we have to get the word out. They're also focused mainly on electing candidates, whereas some of these other groups are exclusively focused on not candidate promotion, but how to safely vote. Kristen says, thank you for the Zoom presentation. Will you be scheduling poll volunteers in different counties? Yes, statewide. Do you need to reach out to local Republican Party offices? You may, if you would like, but you don't have to be Republican to be part of election integrity. That's why the Transparency Foundation is working with anyone who wants to be part of this program. Michelle says, I'm trying to host a planning meeting this Saturday. I was at the SJC meeting weeks ago, signed up. I haven't heard yet from Reform California. Please advise. Contact Brett Wilkins at Reform California at the phone number on the website, reformcalifornia.org, and he will get back to you. Jim asks, will you endorse candidates for House, Senate, and Governor? Yes, we are going to be releasing our election voter guide, the plain English voter guide, statewide on May 1st. And all of you who are on our email list will get a copy of it, and we will be asking you to share that with everybody. And yes, Jim, your concern about the top two voting system is well-founded. We have to get behind one candidate in each of the statewide races to make sure that we get that candidate, at least one candidate, through the general election. Colleen asks, are we going door to door and drive and drag in the general election only or for the primary? Colleen, we're going to be encouraging people to do this in the general election, obviously, but we are also going to be doing as many of these in the primary as is possible and is necessary. In some areas, we know that our candidates will automatically make it to the runoff. But in other areas, we know that we've got to get our votes harvested to get into the runoff. So it will depend upon where we think the hot spots are, where we deploy our volunteers for those programs. Kiergan Peg asks, can you send the slides out after presentation? Yes, they'll be posted on reformcalifornia.org, as well as the Zoom video, by the way. Kristen asked the same question. Kiergan asks, how will EICP, Election Integrity California, coordinate with these efforts? Well, we continue to reach out to them. I think they give bad advice about not voting early. And I know that in the last election, they got called on the carpet by Sean Steele and Harmeet Dillon and others for sending out bad information and encouraging people not to vote early. And so we hope that they got the message and that we hope that they will be more reasonable. But I don't know what the heck they're doing these days. It's been frustrating. Nancy says, I was only one of 2 volunteers in Sonoma. Sad turnout. I know. And that's why we need to do more volunteer recruitment statewide. I think this election, you're going to see more volunteers, Nancy. And also what we can do is see if we can get the local party to do a robo dial and to see if we can recruit more volunteers to work with you. Question here. What do I do if a ballot is sent to my home with a person with another name? you need to report that to problemballots.com to make sure that we can flag that as part of our integrity efforts. You also should report that to the registrar of voters, but good luck getting them to fix it. Tanya or Tana Hosh asks, I thought Newsom used his powers to have mail-in ballots only. Are you saying we can go and vote in person? Yes, you can vote in person at any time by going to the polling centers listed on the registrar of voters for your county, the office for your county. A couple more questions before our time is up.
Carl, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the hand raises.
And mute yourself because I can hear you echoing. All right, Claudia Taylor, you are being unmuted. Please unmute yourself on your end. Claudia Taylor, unmute yourself and ask your question once you're unmuted. There you go. Go ahead.
Could you explain a little bit more in detail your take on not voting early versus voting early?
Yeah, I don't know why some people are saying don't vote early. I think they don't trust the Postal Service. Well, that's why we track our ballots online. If the Postal Service destroys your ballot, it'll be real apparent in 10 days that they didn't do their job. And then you go in and you get your provisional ballot and you get to vote. But we've not seen evidence that the Postal Service is somehow burning ballots. So I don't know what the Election Integrity California ladies are complaining about on this. We've not seen anything to substantiate their allegations. We have seen the very negative consequence that their bad advice has caused statewide. We are losing seats because of them. We are losing elections because people are so suppressed in the vote in the first 2 weeks of the election, and that's just not acceptable. So we need to return the ballots as soon as possible. All of our voters need to flood the election offices with our ballots in the first week. That then gives us, on the campaign side, time to chase the lazy ballots, the lazy voters. Next one, Jordan, go ahead and unmute someone in the meantime.
Kristen Manna.
Kristen, please unmute yourself. We've unmuted you on our side. Please unmute. There you are. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. DeMaio, and thank you for all of your efforts. My question is, I'm involved in a lot of clubs, GOP clubs. Will there be the opportunity for you to give this presentation or one of your staff members to give this presentation to your clubs? Or will you be having future Zoom presentations that we can forward to our clubs about this?
So this will be posted, this video will be posted online later this afternoon so that people can just watch it like an online class. And then there will also be another Reform California Election Integrity Summit in August, because we know a lot of new volunteers will be joining us this summer. We hope that our efforts to recruit new volunteers will be successful. Also, as the Transparency Foundation does their work, but remember, they are recruiting Democrat, independents, and Republicans. They are not partisan. They just want election integrity. They will do their own separate trainings in a nonpartisan way. I'm using their slides here because they've made these slides public, but that training, I believe, is May 2nd, and that's also using Zoom. And anyone who signed up on their website, thetransparencyfoundation.org, will be receiving an invite to that training program as well.
Next will be Christopher.
All right. And in the meantime, while we get that unmuted, Zoraida Norado asks, how does a campaign know when a person has been can be taken off of a list? Well, they know to take it off the list because your vote, the fact that you voted is made public in the database of the state of California. And so the campaigns are constantly going to the registrar of voters office and getting a download of a list of people who have voted already, so they take them off the mailing solicitations on their end. Christopher Paskach,
Close
ahead
enough.
go
Close
ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. What kind of discussions are going on with Election Integrity California? Because the division is obviously a problem that ought to be addressed.
Yeah, I know when they did their commentary during the recall that Sean Steele and Harmeet Dillon and others reached out to them. And I know that some board members from the Republican Party, like Randy Burholtz, reached out to them. So, my hope is that they look at these materials and help us reinforce the messages that are going to help people vote confidently. But basically, they do their thing. We continue to reach out and try to encourage them, but we haven't seen a whole lot of success by their efforts. Judicial Watch did get a win 2 years ago in a lawsuit in Los Angeles, or maybe about 4 years ago now. But even that lawsuit did not do the trick in terms of fixing the problems of outdated voter rolls. So we believe that election integrity will only be solved when we get voter ID in the state of California. Ultimately, that has to be our goal. And in the meantime, this sort of approach of getting everybody engaged in a more meaningful way in election integrity fights, this is the interim package of reforms. Michael asks, how can we put the integrity measure on the ballot? We're going to start signature collection on that after the 2022 election.
That's one, Carl.
Another, we got one more on the video.
Not on video in the Q&A.
Okay, gotcha. Going through these messages real quick. Nancy says, I like not representing a given party while poll watching people are more friendly towards me. Absolutely. What we say is you're not there to represent the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or a candidate. You're there to represent integrity in the process. And so the extent to which you don't represent yourself as I'm a Republican volunteer here to monitor, that's a good thing. You should be there to represent the process and the integrity. Let's see here. A couple other questions. All right. Looks like we answered some of these others. How do you sign up? In about 2 hours, when you go to the website, electionintegrityca.com or .org, I can't remember which, electionintegrityca.com or .org, it will go to the Transparency Foundation's website with all the information. Or you can actually go right now to thetransparencyfoundation.org, thetransparencyfoundation.org, and you can sign up for their nonpartisan election integrity volunteer efforts. With that, I thank you all. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's 1 o'clock, and we will follow up with everyone who signs up to volunteer. Thank you very much.